Do you have what it takes to be a really epic business podcast host?
We started with no one listening to our podcast, and now we have millions of people listening to our podcast. Practicing transitions is a really powerful skill. If you don't have a great way of transitioning, what happens is your guest feels like they're being interrogated. You're asking a list of questions. You're going through the process. They know what the process is. They have a prep doc too. And they're just like, this is like an interrogation. And they're going to maybe take what I say and put it together and make something good.
What would you do in a conversation to transition it? Just act like you're talking to the person normally by showing, I did hear that and I'm listening to it. And let's move over in this direction at the same time.
I think you have to come with an opinion or an angle of opinions so that people can actually know who you are.
They're coming here to hear your point of view and, still, I think, have strong opinions weekly. Hell, don't hold on to something really strong. Because we all know we've heard a host like that where it's like, here they come again. They're going to talk about government again, and push their whatever.
Well, you definitely don't want to argue like that. Yeah. That makes it.
That's for sure. You don't want that.
That makes your business podcasting host career shrink really quick.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Mission Daily. Today we are so excited because Albert and I are here to talk all about how to be a great podcast host, and specifically a business podcast host, because that's mostly what we do here at Mission. So Albert, welcome.
That's right. We had to put that caveat in because when it comes to entertainment, every entertainer's got their own personality. There's going to be some that are more raunchy. There's going to be some that are more punchy. There are going to be some that are more drab and boring. I mean, some of the podcasts I've heard of entertainers, I think to myself, like the pace at which this person talks, I can't stand. But we are here specifically today to talk about business podcast hosting, which often means really shining a light on your guest.
Yep. And so for context for Albert and myself, so I myself have done thousands of podcast interviews with the best founders, the best executives, the best people. Albert, I've done a lot of them. Albert has done over probably 500 interviews.
Yeah, probably over 500 interviews. I think that's a good one.
Okay. But what is very interesting about our background, which I'd love to get into, is that this is not something that either of us wanted to do when we got into it. And we also did not think either of us were good at it. And this was a personal judgment, not me telling Albert, you're not good at it. I actually was pumping him up saying, you'd be really good at this. But both of us probably had certain limiting beliefs of why we would not be good podcast hosts, and it was easier for us to push it, have other people do it. So Albert, tell me a bit about your background of hosting and why you originally thought you were not good at it.
When I first started at Mission, I really wanted to be more behind the scenes. I never thought of myself as a on-air talent, in front of the camera talent or anything like that. So when I first joined Mission, it was more like, hey, this is the operation. Hey, how do we make sure all of these sound files and writing files don't get lost and move through a process where we're doing a lot of volume. Mission was doing a lot of volume at the time. And I was selling software, which I thought was not interesting. I was selling networking software. And I was like, okay, well, let's do something different. It wasn't until fast forward, the previous founder wanted to do something else. And I was like, oh, okay, well, we don't have anyone in the seat. And you're like, you should be in the seat. And I said, I don't know.
IT Visionaries.
Specifically
podcast.
The IT Visionary seat. And I was like, well, I don't know. And I was not really comfortable saying that I was going to do it. And so I don't know exactly what was the convincing factor. But when we first started, IT Visionaries got so many downloads. Of course, it became like its own flywheel effect where more and more people started listening. So without paid advertising. So it became easier to say, okay, well, maybe I'm good at it, because I started getting more of the affirmation from, the guests themselves, as well as the data, the actual downloads. And so it went from, I think a lot of people started podcasts thinking, oh, I'm going to be huge, where I was like, I'm going to be small and hopefully get fired so I can go back to my job that I like. Not that I dislike hosting, but it was just unclear to me that I would be, good. I don't even know if I'm good now, but, I know that I get some positive reviews.
Oh, you get a lot of positive reviews. Albert still thinks he's bad, even though that show crushes it. So, yeah, and we will get into, what pieces make a good host, and also what I spotted in Albert of why I was like, you would be very good at this no matter what you tell me. But yeah, for me too, I also was I liked being behind the scenes at Mission too. So I liked helping out with operations and sales and, producing the content. But I was like, oh no, someone else is better being forward facing than me. I get nervous. I don't like talking on camera. I don't know what to say. I need to be very well researched to even get on there and try and co-host something. And fast forward to today and thousands of interviews, and now it definitely feels much easier. We've had millions of downloads on the show that we host, and I think we've got a good formula for after this many reps, we know how to be a good host. We know what our guests love. We know what our audience loves. So that's what we're about to jump into.
Yeah, let's start. First pro tip. So you want to be a good podcast host, or I think a good interviewer is also an option in case you wanted to do like on the floor at a trade show, or I don't know. What would you say? What are some of the traits, characteristics, skills you think a host should develop?
Yeah, so I will say the first one for me, which maybe feels hard, or someone is like, this is easy, it feels like me, is having a good personality and being authentic. That is something
I don't know what that means. What's that mean?
I know. So I know you're always like, what's good mean? So when at least let's zero in on the authenticity piece.
Yeah.
I think when you look at the market now, you see people getting into these roles, whether they're writing things on LinkedIn, whether they're being a podcast host, whether they're on TV. And a lot of it just looks so fake and scripted and not like themselves. Whereas, if I were to meet someone outside of them being on the camera, I'd be like, what? You're way funnier. You have these silly dad jokes. You do these different things. And then you get on camera and all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I have to be professional and read the script, and like not authentic at all to who you truly are. And so when I think about personality and authenticity, what I really like is finding a host who has something that's unique to them, even if it's a little quirk, even if it's different. And this was one of the things that I spotted in you. I was like, your dry humor is very funny to me. The depth that you can go with people accidentally, like you can get really deep into the weeds of a conversation, like that is just your personality. That's authentically you. And like your comments that you have and what you think is funny that sometimes people don't even laugh at and you're still laughing. Like
I do laugh at my own jokes a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like having a great time. I don't know about
exactly.
you, but I'm having a great time.
So like that right there, I was like, man, that is such a good personality trait to have when you're interviewing chief technology officers, chief information officers, super, very smart, technical people who are probably not used to getting on the mic with someone and having someone sit there, laugh at their own jokes and make maybe somewhat awkward jokes sometimes. Like that is authentically you. So I think authenticity is the number one thing. And when I say personality, that's really like, are you likable? You've met people where you're like, you're just punchable. Like, you're just like putting me on the spot. You're trying to back me into a corner. You're like semi-rude.
But in that defense, that's why we've said business podcast, because I definitely think there are entertainers that are very punchable, but people just like them. Like, when I think about how, for example, the Paul brothers kind of got famous pranking people. Like, who wants, like, that doesn't appeal to me at all. Do you know what I mean?
There's a lot, like comedians, there's a lot of people that are very punchable, I think. And that's why we said this is for, business, tech type of content, like for people who want to host in this space, because you can't be punchable, especially if you're doing what we're doing at Mission, which is interviewing C-suite executives sometimes who are in the Fortune 500, who they're coming in with their PR team, and you cannot be a punchable person. They already have enough of that they've talked about different interviews they've done on CNN and whatnot, where they don't do them because of that. So having a likable personality, being a kind, empathetic human, welcoming the person in so that they can feel safe and secure and like open up and share. Like all of that, I think, is personality based and authenticity based, where they're like, okay, Albert just made a fool of himself real quick in this first 2 minutes. So now I feel okay to be like, okay, I'm going to be able to show up as a guest on this podcast and be comfortable and know that my host just messed up twice and didn't even care.
My compliment to what you were just saying there is, I think what helps support an authentic persona is just coming in, establishing what is your point of view. And I always talk about point of view in behind the scenes of podcasts. But the idea is that you should have an opinion on something, right? And because if you come in and if you don't have the reason why I say you have to come in with an opinion is because you'll notice that people's personalities and questions will start tilting towards their point of view. And I think it's important to have a point of view because people need to understand like who you mentioned authentic self, like where does this person come from in the scope of the domain? And so I'll just use myself for my point of view, and then I'm going to dive into yours a little bit. But when I think of what we've done for IT Visionaries, my point of view has always been, a little bit skeptical, all right? Meaning because I do, and I'm very aware that there are a lot of technological promises out there where some things like don't come true. So whenever I sit down with an interview, I always think to myself, if I was on the other end buying this product, I would already be skeptical. That's who I am naturally. So my questions often go towards like, can you help me validate this? Can you help me understand this? Because I don't necessarily believe everything you say. I've sold software where I've made promises or I was told to make promises that aren't true. So I come in with that angle. And so when someone I'm sitting down with, I'm interviewing says, oh, we have a 30% better ability to bring, insights to action. Like that's a common marketing term. I'll just sit there and be like, what do you mean? Because that's who I am. I'm coming with that point of view. And when I think about for yourself on Mission Daily, your point of view is, I would say that kind of like in the world of possibility, I think is a great way to phrase it. Like if I sit down as an audience member and I listen to a Stephanie Postal's led podcast, I believe there will be some possibility in this, meaning like there's like something hopeful, something that I don't know, something that maybe is experimental, because that is your point of view. And so that kind of leads to that authenticity. And I think a lot of people might shy away. Maybe they would shy away doing a business podcast, meaning like, hey, I don't want to be a skeptic because, I don't want to offend the other person. But that's not really what you're worried about. What you're worried about is getting across like to your audience, like getting good at revealing a specific type of answer. And I think that's how you build an audience, because if you are milquetoast and you only ask the PR questions and you don't have a way of diving into the things you're most interested in, then the audience itself doesn't know what to expect from you either. So it's harder to listen to you because they don't know what you'll tell them. If I think about like a certain fitness podcasters, right? He's going to recommend something to optimize your health and he's going to explain why. And without knowing anything else, right? That's generally what he's always going to come with. And so I think you have to come with that point of view in order to be authentic. Otherwise, I don't know if your audience can get used to following you. You know what I mean? Like people follow people for a reason. And if they don't know why to follow you, then, they won't.
Yep. And I think that point right there is something that we've seen a lot and had to train a lot of our hosts on, of even though this person is a Fortune 10 executive, you still get to have your point of view. You still get to push back in a respectful, kind way. Like that's why the audience is coming here. They're not coming here to listen to business executive content that's all PR approved and like you stick with the questions. They're coming here to hear your point of view and, still I think have strong opinions weekly. Hell, don't hold on to something really strong every single episode. Because we all know we've heard a host like that where it's like, here they come again. They're going to talk about government again, like and push their whatever. It's like,
well, you definitely don't want to argue like that. Yeah, that makes it.
That's for sure. You don't want that.
That makes your business podcasting host career shrink really quick because no one wants to come on your show and get lit up or questioned about everything. And that's uncomfortable. I think defending why it's helpful is something that people like, kind of like how I approach it, is something that a lot of business operators want to do, because that's exactly the sales resistance that they get in real life, which is like, I don't believe you.
Yep. So your point of coming with an opinion into your interviews.
Right. I think you have to come with an opinion or an angle of opinions so that people can actually know who you are. Yep.
So then that one ties perfectly into someone saying, well, how will I have these opinions? Well, the second most important thing is knowing how to prep. Like, what does it look like to be a researcher, to be super curious and to be able to go into the rabbit holes that most people would not be going into, where you're like, oh, I just found this one word. I'm going to go see what this one word is. Now I'm all the way over here in 1925, looking at the history. Like, you need to be a really good researcher and super curious. And I will say at Mission, thankfully, when our hosts get up there, they already have amazing prep docs. They have producers who are prepping them. And I'll say, at least for myself, and I think you do as well, there's still additional research I will do on top of my gold Bible of a prep doc that I'm given, because I know if I'm going and looking for it myself, I'm going to look at things that maybe my producers didn't think about pulling into the document. So you have to have great prep to even come with those strong opinions on, the space that you're interviewing in.
Yeah, I would say a fact's not a fact unless you have a question. That's the way I think about it when I read these prep docs. Is you'll read information, company A has helped company B, but if you don't have a question like how, why, something like that, how or why are great questions to ask. Then what happens is you yourself won't dive to that next layer of information. And if you yourself don't have that next layer of information, what happens is the guest can say something and you just kind of gloss over it. I think when it comes to business podcasts specifically, is people always want to know the how and the why something is true. Because otherwise it would just be like a listicle of like, here are things to do. The how and why is what gives the, meat is a great way to say it. It's like the meat of the story or the curiosity of a story. So that layer of information. So like that's the way I think of it. If I were preparing, it's like if you don't have a question yourself, then that's a fundamentally a problem. Like that's maybe a bad angle to go down. You're better off going down a different question. So I think a lot of the soft skills, when people in leadership positions have talked about soft skills, I try to always find like why the reasoning is or how they saw an outcome or impact, because I think it's, leading with your authentic self. That is a common term, but I'll always ask like, how? What do you mean? Because on the surface, that's not enough. It's not interesting enough, right? I think that's something a lot of people say, but like the actual how of how you did that with your team or new company, then that becomes possibly more interesting.
Yep. For prepping for interviews, one area that I do see hosts get wrong is they get their prep doc. And like you said, if you don't have your own question, you're probably off on the wrong path already because you didn't do your own research. But when a new host gets up there with their prep doc and they're like back in 2020, you ran an ad campaign that did X, Y, and Z, and they're just reading off the prep doc. And that's where I see most hosts have issues, because they get a great prep doc and then they just stick to these questions and they can't go off of them. They can't talk like a normal human. They can't just have a conversation around it or just know like, here's some themes that I want to cover, but I don't need to ask the question in this way that it was given to me. And so that is, once again, like if you're doing your own research and you already are staying on top of the spaces that you're interviewing in, you probably can just look at it and be like, oh, okay, I'm talking about cloud computing today. Or I should ask them about this part of their, I don't know, RAG network. Why am I talking about IT stuff? I'm not even an IT host. Anyways, it's like you can know themes of what you're going after, but not having to read word for word. And that's, I think the biggest thing I see with new hosts getting hung up on is like asking the question exactly as is and getting stuck in that.
Yeah. My compliment to that is actually more of a hard skill, I think. And it's a blend of hard and soft skill, but practicing transitions is a really powerful skill. So what I mean by practicing transitions is the ability to jump from topic A to topic B in a relatively smooth way so that it doesn't feel like a jarring, abrupt stop to your guest. So in what Stephanie just explained, if you don't have a great way of transitioning, that's what it feels like. What happens is your guest feels like they're being interrogated. You're asking a list of questions. You're going through the process. They know what the process is. They have a prep doc too. And they're just like, oh, this is like an interrogation. And they're going to maybe take what I say and put it together and make something good. I think being able to practice transitions, being able to flow from topic to topic is a soft or hard skill, depending on how you look at it, that you should practice. So if you already have it in your mind that you want to move to the next question, you have to think of a way to like pull someone over there. And so generally like domain expertise is going to be necessary. So I'll use my example. It is from IT, but that's the show I host. But our sponsor often likes to ask networking questions. It's currently sponsored by Zayo Network. Most of our guests want to talk about AI, but I know AI is very hard to move that amount of data, and AI LLMs require ridiculous amounts of data. And so when I hear an opportunity, when the opportunity I'm listening for is, and I know they're going to say it, is they're going to explain where all their data comes from. And it's going to be a multitude of sources. It always is. That's exactly how I think about speed, movement, and how it can kind of insert a transition and be like, okay, so now you have all this disparate data secured in separate sources. How much does it matter that it can move to your AI processing engine sub-second? And I know it matters. It's like a planted, baited question, but it flows and smoothly. Like they're like, oh yeah, well, yeah, I got to have the best network. It's got to be huge. And it's got to move. You know what I mean? Like they want to answer it because so you've already kind of baited them into talking about that next subject based upon a problem set or an opportunity set that you hear. And so that is something that you can practice. It is not like, oh, be more cordial. I don't know if you can practice that, but you can definitely practice your transitions, and it helps a lot with what you said, Steph, is of like moving through the questions without relying so much on your questions that you just kind of list them all out.
Yep. Yeah, I do something very similar for when I'm interviewing people. I more listen to, okay, they're talking about this concept, and I will use a word that they use. If they're like, oh yeah, I use this marketing agency for blah, blah, blah. I will take something to show that I'm actively listening to what they're talking about and then do what you did. Pull it into the area that I want to go and be like, Yeah. So your marketing agency, like we're talking about this, like, what about your social media? Do they have any ties to that? Like I'll somehow link things together, even if there is no link, because then they can just be like, oh no, that's a whole nother team. And then we're off in the direction that I want to go into. But that's where a lot of times hosts will be like, okay, we're talking about marketing right now and I need social. And they'll just be like, okay, Skip, tell me about your social activities. And it's like two very disjointed conversations instead of just like, what would you do in a conversation to transition it? Just act like you're talking to the person normally. And how would you try and transition something by showing, I did hear that and I'm listening to it. And let's move over in this direction at the same time. So similar to what you do.
Yeah. Baited yeses and baited nos, if you practice them, when you say a baited no is like, there's no way they would agree with you. They're going to defend a position. And a baited yes is 100%. They're going to agree with you and they're going to explain how they did it because they want to sound good. So a good example of a baited no is if I'm talking to someone in security, citing maybe Equifax, big security breach, stock goes in the tanker, but then it rebounds just a couple months later. It's like, so does it even matter if I'm secure? Of course he's going to say no. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Security
you need
does
to be secure
matter.
Still.
Yeah, you need to be secure, right? So you're almost planting false friction. Like I'm not being argumentative or combative, but I have planted a point of view where the person, I already know they're going to defend their industry. Like there's no way they're going to let us like, yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. They're not going to say that.
Don't worry about your data. It'll keep getting lost. You don't need to be secure.
Yeah, I just posted about like, hey, the biggest social security network leak. And my point of view on it is like, by now it's, you should just assume everybody has it. Like there's no reason to think it's private anymore. You know what I mean? And so like, I would say something stupid like, oh, so does it even matter? Right. And of course people say, no, it still matters. If, for example, if I was talking to someone in like verification, I know that they would say it still matters. Now, the next step is verification. Like you need to verify who that is. But anyways, a planted no, a planted yes is a great way to get someone talking because you know they have a point of view.
Yeah. So when you're doing these planted yeses and nos and transitions, one of the things that we kind of touched on a little bit, but I think is really important is being an active listener as a host. Like, when you're talking to someone and they're like just waiting for the next time they can ask a question. They're like, yeah, I'm not listening to anything you're saying because I have a list of questions or I actually really just want to do this and ask you for a favor. Like you can feel that energy and it's easy to not be an active listener, especially when you're a newer host because you're like, I just want to get this right. And I want to, ask the questions I wanted to ask. And you're just completely tuning out the guest. I totally did this in the beginning. It was hard for me to focus on like truly listening because I was like, I want to get this right. And I'm hosting a e-commerce podcast and I don't really know much about e-commerce. And I have this prep doc and I feel like I need to stick to it because I don't trust myself yet. And now in hindsight, I'm like, it would have been better interviews had I just listened and asked curious questions and been like, oh, you're talking about supply chain issues. Like, tell me more about what's happening specifically for you. In my head, I know nothing about supply chain, but just like, let's open up the conversation instead of me trying to find a specific question. So that active listening piece, like your guest will feel it, you'll feel it. And then, the listener especially, they'll know, oh, they just have questions in front of them because that was very awkward. This person just had a really interesting point about how they lost $1 billion in like the supply chain issues. And then Steph just moved on, like skipped over that, didn't even ask details about like, how did you lose $1 billion? She's like, oh, okay, well, in other news, let's go over to your, your new product line. People will be like, what? Like, did you not hear $1 billion? And so that's something that I think it takes time to learn of like how to truly listen and listen to the things that matter to guide the conversation. Yeah, but super important.
My follow-on tip to active listening is I think it's easier to listen for the things, like I said before, that you're already naturally curious about, right? Mm-hmm. And so that helps, I think, the conversation flow. So I think when a host specifically forces knowledge that they don't actually have because they think they should, it can sometimes feel jarring and awkward. So my thought process, for example, I am always very, very aware that software is just a tool. I always say it, right? Like you put a hammer on the shelf, it doesn't do anything. Someone has to use it. And so whenever I hear people say, this is what happens, or this is what happened, I always want to ask how, because I don't believe you install the software and this company is magically transformed. I don't believe that at all, right? Yeah. I believe there's probably training, there's probably implementation, there's probably hiccups, there's probably when did you know you got it right, when did you know you get it wrong. So I'm already listening for that opportunity to ask those kinds of questions. And generally, I think the people that are listening to my show want to know those answers, because I think they also would agree that there are a lot of tools they could just choose. And I think people in my industry know that just because you buy something doesn't mean it's going to work, right? Work for you specifically. So that active listening is made easier back to, and I'm glad we went in that order. It's like that authenticity point of view. It's like, it's easier to do everything else if you've established that first.
Yeah. So the part about you asking questions is another piece that I think falls in here is you should be asking the dumb questions that,
yes,
because a lot of times we are putting hosts on our network of shows who don't have a ton of background always in that space. Albert's a little different because his show, because it's technical, because of the people he was talking to, I was like, because you have this background, it's actually helpful. I wouldn't put someone who doesn't know anything about IT as a host on this show. But a lot of our other ones, you don't have a ton of background always, and that's okay. But you have to ask the dumb questions. And I see a lot of hosts sometimes be like, oh, someone just said this kind of acronym, like some really long acronym.
Oh, yeah.
And being like, I'm not going to ask what that is because that's probably a marketing term that I maybe should know. I'm just not a marketer. Instead of just being like, what is that term? And like asking the dumb questions to really like make sure the audience understands, what is this person talking about? If they say some really big word, you should follow up, because a lot of these spaces, if someone can't explain something simply, then that means they actually don't understand it anyways. And so if someone is speaking outside your ability to even understand it, that means they're probably not an expert anyways, because that's so far above your head, they don't know how to dumb it down in a way that many people will understand. At least that's my point of view.
My point of view is you could be very knowledgeable, but bad at communicating.
That too. Yeah. Your space. Yeah. You could just not know how to communicate that well. That's true. Yeah. But I think if someone can't really clarify, I mean, even if you think about something more complex, if someone's like, oh yeah, there's certain blockchain technology for, financial systems. And if you're like, well, what are they doing at, like, if you're at JP Morgan Chase, like, what kind of things are they doing there? And if they're just using acronyms and big terms and like other pieces of lingo that like you wouldn't really understand, if you just ask, like, just show me some examples, and they can't be like, oh yeah, you know how when someone submits a payment and then they get it from their bank, that's blockchain behind the scenes. Like, you should be able to simplify it in a way that most people understand. But I think many hosts don't want to ask those questions because they're like, well, I have to come off like I am the IT expert. Yeah. And so I don't want to ask them what they're talking about here. But really, everyone in your audience is like, I don't know what this means. Can you please follow up and be the dumb one, the dumb host in the room who's asking the question, so that I can actually walk away from this interview and learn something afterwards, instead of walking away and wondering what that guest was even talking about.
I would say the intro tip for this is a little bit of a crutch. You can start off by saying, for those who are new to the show, or for those who are new to marketing, real quick, help them out. What's ESP? Oh, that's an email service provider. Awesome. You mentioned deliverability is a big deal. Well, what percentage? So you're asking the silly questions to kind of give you that baseline, but you've kind of hidden it for our new listeners, for the new members, for someone new to marketing. You're kind of deflecting, right? For anybody but me. It's a tactic and a trick. You'll see it used often in hosts and interviews. Of course, if you rely on it too much and you say that, every 10 lines, people will catch on that you don't know anything. But when you're first starting out, especially, I think a lot of businesses or people out there might be thinking about starting their own podcast. I think it's okay to do that every now and then. It generally flows in the conversation. I don't think most people will notice that you've asked a simple question.
Yep. Yeah, agree. Okay, what's up next? Our next tip for being a great host.
So this is a challenge. Well, it's a bit of a challenger. I tend to agree, but also don't agree. But professionalism, looking the part. And I'll explain where my point of view comes from, but let's start with you. Obviously, I'm in a more professional setup right now. If you take a look,
yeah, I'll say
fancy look at stage and studio. Yeah,
you're good. You're
look at this setup. Studio, but I'm still dressed like me. You're dressed like you.
I'm dressed like me.
You're dressed like you. I'm dressed like me. But
we're still authentic to ourselves. But like, who's going to say no to this setup, which is actually not that hard of a setup, but looks great. So when I think about professionalism, I do think that if you don't have a good mic, I'm not listening to you. There's been a lot of podcasts.
That's a must.
Like, I don't want you in my ears, inside my head, listening to shitty audio and a bad mic setup and like wind blowing or whatever you think you're doing. Like, you need a good mic. And so that's number one. number two is, Mission now is like very much a video first company in a lot of ways. So I think looks really matter. And we've seen that with a lot of our performance for our shows is when you have higher quality video, clips on YouTube perform better. Social media stuff performs better. And so when I think of professionalism, not as much about your outfit, although I will say I do think it matters in certain cases, depending on who you're talking to. If you are wanting to gain respect from a CEO of a Fortune 10 company, which one of our other hosts at Mission was interviewing in the earlier days a couple years ago, like, you get to wear a button up for this specific person. You can look and see if it's like, okay, maybe, I don't know, like a Zappos, fine, wear something different. But if it's like Oracle,
a bank, insurance,
a bank, yeah, like read the room, look at what this person's probably going to show up like, and like at least look nice. Like, don't show up probably in a hoodie for that specific person. So I think it's more of reading the room of like, who are you talking to? What is your audience? And how do you make sure that it's fitting whatever concept and guest flow you have for that specific show? Like for you, I'm like, do what you want, because your guests, they're not going to judge you by your looks. They're gonna be like, is Albert smart? And is his persona and the way that he's coming off, do I respect him? Is he making me feel comfortable? But they're not going to be like, does his hair look good? And your background, we all know sometimes your background's not great, which I still don't like. But, at least when it comes to outfits and stuff, that's never something that I've really worried about with you. But for other hosts of mine, I have been like, yo, get it together. Like, get a better outfit on, look presentable. You're talking to CMOs today, and CMOs care about how you look because they're coming on looking fly. So yeah,
or stylish. Definitely stylish. You know what I mean? Like they have a style. When I think of the professionalism portion, the microphone is an absolute must. We use Shure mics at Mission. You should invest in a Shure mic. Don't tell me it's $300+. It doesn't matter. Get one. Get a stand so you're not fidgeting with it. Don't be stupid. If you want, what we've learned about podcasts is people will tolerate. And that's actually questionable. People will tolerate lesser video with higher audio fidelity than the reverse. If you have poor audio, the likelihood someone sticks around beyond like 50 seconds is so low. Like it just sounds bad. And that includes what Stephanie mentioned, wind, like outdoor interviews, good luck. You need all kinds of equipment to do an outdoor interview. But I will also say the cameras are starting to make a big deal. So video first, I think we already know Spotify, of course, has video streaming allowed. I don't believe, I would believe Apple Podcasts is very soon to follow. I think all of them will be a video optional. But if video is an option, video is a must. And here's the reason why. Because in editing podcasts, you're going to need the platforms to recommend you. Platforms aren't stupid. They want to recommend things that they know people will consume and stick around and watch. And so the demands, for example, on YouTube are such that the quality has now gone up. The demand is up. So will the algorithm show your video over one that's at a higher quality? Maybe not. You'd have to out-index it by listenership. But when you're starting, you have no listenership. So how are you going to beat something that looks better than yours? The answer is you won't. So it's becoming a table stake of like the great equipment. As far as like stylistically and backdrops, I always think it helps, but it won't stop you from starting. I think starting and getting your style down is actually more important than getting your backdrop right. We've seen that evolve, right? Because that's just how the style, the sound, and the look, I would say in that order, right? You got to get or actually sound first. Like if you have bad sound, you can't even get started. So you have to have great sound. Then your style, and then the video, the backdrop, the look of it is probably the next to follow. But that would be the order I would focus on. But if you don't have good audio, you can't even get started.
Yep. So with the term professionalism, the other thing that comes to mind for me is you as a host, you're talking to a lot of, really amazing guests. How do you think about introducing yourself before, during, after with that person? How are you staying in touch with them? Like to be a good host, I think it's like also about nurturing a relationship from the beginning all the way through and thinking like, how do I keep that guest in the loop of like the process so that when they're coming on, I know that they feel comfortable because let's just say our producer sent them prep and is working with their PR team and like they are coming on. They probably had a prep call with us at that point. Like they're very prepared and feeling very safe. And then when they get on, how do you interact with them? And then afterwards, what do they hear from you? As the host, I also think that's important. I know our producers do a lot of the follow-up afterwards of here's your episode if you want to approve it and any edits and all of that. But I also think as the host, like, be a human. Hey, thanks for coming on. That was awesome. I'm going to like your stuff on LinkedIn now. Maybe I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. Like, literally just think like, what would I do if this person was in front of me, which oftentimes they're not, and how would I treat this new relationship in a way that's respectful to the time they just gave me of an hour of sharing their wisdom for free. I mean, at least for all of our guests, we don't pay them. And so just kind of respecting that, where they're like, man, I feel very held by, mission, the host, like everyone really helped make this the best process ever. So now I'm going to tell everyone about it and, send my friends to maybe be guests as well. And I'm going to share my episode and just really giving them an amazing experience by choosing to be a guest on the show.
That's definitely where I could improve a lot. Because and this is where points of view can hold you back, is I'm like the type of person that doesn't like to be bothered. And so like, I always think to myself, they probably don't want to be bothered either, because I know what it's like to be in an IT decision maker and you get hit by a lot of vendors wanting to sell you stuff. And so I never wanted to be the type of person that does that. Although to Stephanie's point, every time I've asked to be connected to some of these people, they're always like, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they've had a good experience. It's not a problem. The preparation, I would say also everything Stephanie said, plus the preparation. The preparation actually, I think is what starts it. Because if you don't have good preparation, none of these other things matter and they don't follow up. Meaning if you sit down unprepared, don't know the subject, don't know the domain, don't know the industry, don't know good follow-up questions, like, of course the experience is bad. If the experience is bad, it won't get recommended. If it doesn't get recommended, you won't get your second guest. And everything in the world is a flywheel, but podcasts really are. All right. Meaning like if you don't get good guests to tell their friends to also do the show, you can't get a Rolodex of guests. For us, we have the advantage now that we have a great Rolodex. So getting a new guest is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it feels easier, right? We can show them the Rolodex of guests, and that makes it right away, it validates the show and it validates their ability to come on the show. Like, should they come on the show? Does it have an audience? They don't even ask us really questions. Like they used to ask for press kits. You remember back in the day? Well, show me your press kit.
Yeah.
Now
we haven't
like,
gotten that in
can
a long
I be
time.
on the show?
Yeah. We're like, show us your press kit.
Yeah.
At least for the PR companies. Why?
Yeah. And so like that, it all adds up, and that gives you that creates the success. So it's your professionalism, the way you make someone feel, but all that comes from preparation. If you don't prepare, none of the stuff will follow. None of it.
Yep.
So, we've spent all this time talking about what makes a great host, but we also kind of have a goal ourselves. And that is, we at Mission want to find the next great business podcast host. Let's make it simple. We have a lot of demand and we have a limited team. We know we need to expand our host Rolodex, and there is no better way to find the next host than to see you in action. Steph, what are we looking for?
Yeah. So, I mean, other than all the things that we listed above, I want to see someone
other than
all of those things. I want to find someone who, one, is eager to be in the spaces that we're looking for. So like some of the spaces that we are possibly going to be looking for hosts in would be, the IT space, something like what Albert's hosting, like someone who is just like, I would love to talk to a CTO for an hour. I love this space. I am reading all the newsletters all the time. I'm all over Discord. I'm in the Reddit threads. Whatever you're doing, like you are obsessed with that space. Same thing with AI. We're looking for people who love AI. We're looking for people in cybersecurity, finance, customer experience, marketing. I mean, there's a lot of different industries that we're looking for great people in. And even if you don't have background for many of those, you might have something that's kind of relatable where you'll still be a good fit. So if you're like commerce, for example, we are going to be looking to relaunch our Up Next in Commerce podcast. You might say, well, I'm a marketer. You might be perfect if you have the energy for it, if you're interested in this space, if it's something that you want to dive into and you want to talk to these people. And so lots of different industries and spaces where we are planning to launch shows. And so if you think you're a good fit, we would love to hear from you. And the best part is if you're eager and excited. Yeah. Are there any no-nos with someone when people come to us and they want to host? I mean, I could think of maybe a couple, but what do you think?
I don't know if there's a no. We're going to do this in an approach where we're going to be looking for the best. So if you think that you're, their submissions better than you, I mean, we're going to notice that. And so what I mean by that is I specifically would place tremendous weight on your habits. And what I mean by that is, are you already doing the thing? Meaning the thing here is hosting a show. So what I'm looking for is people that already have some type of show, maybe that they're already running, or they have a community that they're communicating with. It doesn't have to necessarily be a podcast. It could be, some people have YouTube channels. Some people have possibly a podcast. It might be just a web show that you do every now and then. It could be a thought leadership group or a Substack that you write for. I'm looking for people who actively are looking to share and find knowledge. And the reason why active is the big key here is because what I've learned, and I'm going to shout out Levi, our newest hire, so Levi is a video editor for Mission. And we found him simply because he runs his own like gaming channel. That's the best way to describe it. He's got a gaming channel. And while Mission doesn't do anything with gaming, we can clearly see effort. At bats. He's learning. He goes, there's like a really cool moment in his thumbnails where it transitions from style A to style B. And so me and Stephanie instantly saw that. Like, he learned something that taught him to do this. Like, I don't think this is just a gut instinct. Let's ask him. If it's just gut instinct, then I don't know. But like, turns out he did. He tested the thumbnail. It turns out it worked out better. So I like people that are actually doing the thing, because if you are already doing the thing, the likelihood you get better at the thing goes up infinitely. If you're thinking about doing the thing, but you're not doing the thing, I don't know where you'll be.
Yep.
And I don't know if you have good habits, and I don't know if you'll love doing it, because as with any job, once it's your job, look, pro athletes complain about practice. So, you know what I mean? Once it's your job, it can, I think all the things that you don't like about something will be present. And so if it's just you in your spare time think you want to be a podcast host, I don't know if you're the best fit. I want someone who's actively doing the thing. And the thing here is producing entertainment, producing content, teaching a community, something like that lets me know that you're very, very much so interested in pulling information, extracting information, sharing information in a creative way. That would give me a great indicator that you're on the path.
Yep. Yeah. I was going to say something similar of like, do you have some kind of following where people are like, I want to hear from you? And it could not be, maybe it doesn't have to be huge. I'm okay if you're like, I have 500 followers who tune into my Substack every week or whatever. And it's all about, let's say, marketing. And like, people love to hear my marketing tips. Like, just something that shows, like you said, you're doing something to put content out there, stay on top of a certain space, do your research. And then you also have people who are like, I like this. Maybe it's on LinkedIn. Maybe you're like, every one of my LinkedIn posts gets 100 people who like it. Cool. That's great. And people are engaging with it. Okay. It shows that you've got something there because you have an audience who actually cares enough to comment on your post. So yeah, showing some kind of,
I call it habits.
Just proof of work. Yeah. Habits.
Proof of work.
Yeah. Yep.
Before Oprah was Oprah, I think she was like a local beat reporter for her, for her local town news station. I think by the way, I just saw this. Everyone who listens to me knows I'm a big Barstool fan. You judge me all you want, but I do like Barstool. But I saw in the Olympics that Alex Cooper was doing the interviews at the Olympics on NBC. And so, and her name I'm always reminded of, because it's constant, right? She's top 10 podcast, one of the biggest earners. She's going to sign another, possibly, I read, like they're talking 8 to 9 figure deal for her extension. But I remember back in the day watching an episode of a Barstool show where Portnoy admitted like he wanted Cooper at Barstool. So Cooper already was making her show. She was already cutting her own clips, making her own edits, and forget about subject matter, because I think she's evolved a lot since when she was, a Barstool act. But the point wasn't the act itself. It was all the other things that she was doing where Portnoy, obviously he signed her and he said, I thought she was just going to be I thought she was going to make it. She's like, she was going to figure it out. And of course she's now ascended well past I mean, she alone, I think all the Barstool shows combined won't make what she makes now. You know what I mean? Like she's gone beyond, and she's now, I think, just a general personality. I mean, if you're covering the Olympics, NBC feels kind of safe with you. You know what I mean? Like NBC's not, that's a big seat to have. And so, I think that's the best way to describe what we're looking for is who is that emerging talent who's already doing what we're talking about that just needs maybe a bigger, better platform to explode.
Something that comes to mind for me when I think about our team members and our hosts is you also kind of have to be multifaceted. Like you can't just be like, I'm an expert in IT. I just know a lot about IT and I read this, all the time. It's like many people that are at mission kind of do a couple things. And I think because of that, it allows them to be a more powerful host because they're thinking about, let's just say, for instance, for IT visionaries, you also are, COO at mission, you do a lot of other things. And how you might think about the show is different because of the operations piece where you're like, wait, why are things getting caught up right now in production? Like, let me go and think about the operations of it. Like you can think outside of just that host job of like, how do I make sure that anything I'm a part of is also going well, or at least how to think about how to solve it. And so when I think about most of the people at mission, many of them have that bigger viewpoint to be able to zoom out and be like, okay, I may be, let's say, a video editor, but I'm also wondering how this is working when it comes to downloads or how these intros are working. Or, hey, what about for our sales materials? Like what's happening around sponsorship stuff and how can I help? So having that, I call it kind of like this entrepreneurial mindset where it's like you're treating it like it's your own company, your mini company, where you're like, my show has audio, it has video. It also like, does it have a newsletter yet? And, how are we thinking about sponsors? Like that kind of hustle, I really appreciate as well, which would, that's more of like you're a full-time mission employee and you're also hosting, but you're like contributing in other ways. I think that's what makes you as like this power player because you're a really great host. And I'm also like, and I know operations covered, this covered, but like you're able to think in a multifaceted way that's not just like zoomed in on one specific niche.
Absolutely. And I think the best way to display that is to demonstrate it. Just such a big believer in that. And so for anyone out there who's listening still and saying, okay, they're going to tell me I can apply via, an email address or there's going to be a website, but we're going to be like, time out. That's not how we are going to be evaluating talent. I know this sounds different, but it's actually good. Steph, how would you like people to put their hand up and say, hey, evaluate me?
Yeah. So what I would like is I'm pretty sure we will have this open on LinkedIn, but it will be submitting some kind of proof of work. So I'd love to see, like, you have to be on video and whatever you submit us, and we'll have some guidelines in our listing, but definitely a video covering like the guidelines that we have in our LinkedIn post and showing the proof of work of like, where have you built community before? What space are you most interested in? Are you obsessed with it? Show me why. Like we will have specific questions that go through kind of exactly what we talked about of, are you doing this on your own time without a boss telling you to do something? Like it's not because your boss is telling you to look into marketing. You just love marketing or you just love e-commerce. And so we'll be asking questions like that in our post, which we will link up in the show notes. At the end of this episode on YouTube, we will have a link to it. And the other thing too is like thinking about, why do you want this? Like, I really want to know the why behind why is this something that you want to do? And what are you willing to give up to do it? Because, I don't want someone applying being like, I'm in a 9-to-5. Can I fit it around there? No, you cannot. If you have a 9-to-5 job that you do not want to give up, this is certainly not the role for you. This is very much a more full-time-ish role where you're so excited and obsessed with
say it's
this
a full-time
space.
We're hiring full-time.
Yeah.
We're hiring full-time.
It's
That's
full-time.
why being multi-talented is advantageous.
Yep.
Let's get it a full-timer.
There you
For
go.
me, we're going to see all those for sure. Send a link to your portfolio. It's not portfolio. It's a link to proof of work. We want to see your proof of work. Link me your Substack. Link me your Twitter handle. Link me wherever it is you have decided to build your community. I think to all the great channels and of the things that I follow, like, would I ever believe that a avatar called Strip Mall Guy is interesting? No, but do I follow Strip Mall Guy? Hell yeah, I do, because he constantly gives unbelievably great tips on commercial real estate. I'm not even in commercial real estate, but you can also clearly tell people follow him. People like listen to him. Like he's got a huge following. And then there's like car dealership guy. There's like gas station guy. Like I'm following avatars that constantly give tips. You know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't have to be video. I think video is preferred, but if you can demonstrate you're building community and can carry audience, you definitely have an inexplicable magic that we want to multiply. I think that is a big, There's a big difference between believing you're interesting and proving you're interesting. Huge difference. And I want to work with people that have already proven them to be interesting. Because, I subscribe to Reed Hastings' team mentality. Mission is on. This is just my interpretation. I'm not speaking for Stephanie. This is just me myself. But mission's duty as a company is to build the best team. Sometimes the players you currently have might not be good enough, and you can get better players. And I think for myself, I think the IT Visionary Show could jump again if it had someone closer to software. So I'm putting a shout out there. If you're out there,
you're going to take Albert's job.
closer to the software development, because I've now noticed my examples not as applicable. I haven't developed software since 2016, which in software is might as well never done it at all. You know what I mean? And so like my ability to understand what a CIO, CTO is evaluating is coming from, I think, an older place. And so could it use a refresh or possibly a multiplier? Could we add gasoline to the show's audience? I believe the answer is yes. That's why I want to meet people that can take ITV to the next level. That's just my personal desire for that show. I know you have desires for other shows, but that's what we're looking for, is like proof that examples that, hey, you might be the person, added to our audience, added to our ad buying capability, added to our sponsorships and partnerships. You're going to make this show explode. That's what we want.
Yep. Yeah. I love it. The last thing I'll add is why Mission's great is, one, we've built up a lot of podcasts. Many of our shows have bigger audiences than the majority of business podcasts that are out there, that have launched, that have died after 30 episodes, that have gotten under 100 downloads per episode. Like, we have great audiences. We know how to grow our audiences. And when a host comes into these roles, they are so taken care of because our team is magic. And our producers and our editors, like, you are so well taken care of going into this host role. I think it feels like the red carpet is rolled out for you as a host, where you're like, oh, I'm just here. It's like prepped and ready, and my things are ready, and my guests have already been booked for me. And wow, these are like really high up people that somehow my producer landed. So there's so many amazing things about being a Mission host. And I will give us a shout out because we've been doing this a while, since 2017, and we're probably some of the best out there.
We definitely do have a great team. If you've heard this and you're interested and you have proof of work, hit the link below. If you want us to reshare any of your content, tag us. Let us take a look at it. If we think we can stand behind it, and if you're okay with us resharing your existing videos or content, tag us in the socials. We're looking for ways to amplify. There feels like no better way to ask for that than to just put it publicly out there. So if you're listening, you're like, man, I run a sick community on cybersecurity. I want to run a security show. I already do it. Let's go.
Come at us. We're here.
Till next time, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.